Clifton Tozer was born in Chicago in 1925. He enlisted in the Marine Corps as soon as he graduated high school in 1943. After his training in boot camp, Cliff became a paratrooper in the South Pacific. However, the dense jungles made jumping impossible and the Marine paratroops were disbanded. He was then made an infantryman in the 5th Division, 28th Marines I Company, and sent to Iwo Jima. His unit landed on February 19, 1945.
My job really was to sneak up on pillboxes and put this C2 in the side on Iwo Jima, and I never did it because I couldn't get there. They were so strategically set up that no matter what pillbox you got to, there were two looking right down at you while you were trying to get at it. And so what we did an awful lot, and I did that, and that's how I got shot, is that I was directing tanks. We did have tanks on Iwo Jima, and thank God we did, because they were taking care of our pillboxes. They had flamethrowers and they had cannons on them, but most of our tanks were flamethrowers. Now that's a tank that can shoot a flame anywhere to 75 to 150 feet. The flamethrower, incidentally, is now illegal in war. You can't use them. And we also had men who were flamethrowers. They had a tank on their back and they had a big blowtorch and they would try to get as close, but they couldn't get up to the pillboxes because they were so well protected. So the tanks did the bulk of the job, and we had to do a lot of directing in that regard. And while I was directing a tank, I got shot. A pillbox is a reinforced room. Think on the side of a hill, and they dig out, a space of about 10 by 10. And they cement the whole thing inside, the walls and everything. And they have a cement maybe anywhere from 4 to 8 inches thick. That's pretty thick. But they put a little slit so they can look out. And that slit may be, that wide. And so they can shoot over here, they can shoot over there, they can shoot here, they can shoot there. And they'll have a pillbox here, a pillbox there, a pillbox there, a pillbox up there. And they dig out all these pillboxes. Now the Japanese were very good. Not only did they have these pillboxes, but they had doors inside of them going to tunnels underneath the ground. So they could walk from one end of the island to the other end of the island underground and never come out. There was a network of tunnels and accesses that you wouldn't believe. The Japanese were bombed for 72 days on Iwo Jima. This is a fact. 72 days. I don't have the exact number, but I think something like 20 Japanese were killed and about 100 wounded in 72 days, which means that's nothing. You know, they were much stronger than we anticipated. There were about 25,000 Japanese on the island. We used about 35 Marines to try and take the island. But they were so fortified and so effective in their tunneling that they could move all around that whole island. And the island was roughly 4 miles long, at one place 300 or 400 yards wide, at another place a mile wide. So it wasn't a very big island, but they had tunnels through that entire island, and they could go anywhere they wanted to go, and without exposing themselves to danger.
While he may have seen few Japanese, there is one sight from Iwo Jima that he will never forget. This memorable view was the raising of our flag on Mount Suribachi.
I know when we first saw the flag go on Suribachi, and I don't remember seeing the first one, the one I showed you the picture of, but I remember seeing the second one. And what a thrill it was, what it did for the entire invasion forces. They just, I've heard people say over and over again, you know, it just lifted their spirits. It's like somebody just gave you a great big hug and said, everything's going to be all right. And that's what it did. And it was just a miracle because it was probably the most inspirational picture that came out of World War II.
Although the soldiers' spirits were raised by seeing the American flag, the 5th Marine Division suffered the most casualties of all the original invasion force. Cliff was among the approximately 3,000 wounded in action on Iwo Jima.
Well, every tank that you see in combat has a phone on the outside. And it's on the, look at the tank going this way, and on the right rear, I guess it could be on the left rear, but this one was on the right rear, there's a phone. And you can pick the phone up and talk to the person in the inside. And so that's what I did, many times. And this particular one, this was about, well, March 13th is when it happened. That's when I was shot. And we landed on February 19th, 1945, and I was shot on March 13th. And so I've got the phone and I'm telling him where this pillbox is. I can see it, but I can't get to it. And he is listening to me, and while I'm explaining exactly where it is, I get shot. And I just drop the phone, I fall into a pit. You know, they had pits around there. When I say pit, it's like a foxhole. You know, the terrain was very rough. And my friend, Bud Bitter, the one I showed you the picture, came to me. By the way, corpsmen in combat are the unsung heroes of war. A corpsman is a medical man. He's the person that goes to medical school and learns how to give first aid under all circumstances. And when I say all circumstances, for example, one fellow I remember, Jim Cook, his whole shoulder was torn off. He died, but he has to go in there and do something with that. I was shot in the stomach right here, and he has to go and do something bad. Now, mine's not bad. That other young fella there that was in that picture of 4 had his whole arm ripped open and his chest ripped open from a shrapnel. And Bud had to take him and give him first aid until he got to the base hospital. And that's where I went. I went to a hospital on the island, a makeshift hospital, and they operated on me and put me about a 12-inch scar here to find if I had any internal injuries that they didn't know about, because they didn't know where the bullet went, it went through me. And so then I went from there to the ship, and from the ship to Guam. But when I was shot, I fell down into this pit. Bud came and took care of me. And while we were talking to each other, we were both tears in our eyes. It was a very emotional moment for both of us, because I was leaving and he was seeing me go. He worried about me. And shortly thereafter, he got wounded too. So we caught up with each other. But my wound was not that great. It was what they call a $1 million wound. I was shot in the side, came out the back, but no vital organs were hurt. And so I went back to my outfit. And that's one of the sad stories, but good stories, is that I was scheduled for the invasion of Japan before the atom bomb stopped the war. Our 5th Division, and they told us we were assigned to Japan, and I've seen plans where we were supposed to go. And they assumed, didn't know, that would be at least 200,000 killed in the invasion of Japan, because the entire island was preparing for the war. And this means children, wives, grandmothers, grandfathers were all preparing, because the Japanese were so imbued with their culture that they would gladly give up their life to protect, if that's what the emperor said. And the emperor was the sole ruler in terms of Japan. Whatever he said, people did. They had their warlords and everything who kind of dominated the politics and what they're going to do. But Hirohito, who was the emperor, was going to tell the people to prepare to protect the island at all costs. So here we're going to have, well, like they're having all these suicide bombers in Iraq. See, they didn't do that in World War II, nowhere. But they were planning on doing all of those things, which meant that for us to win the war by taking Japan was going to be very, very costly. And I'm glad I didn't go. I'm glad they dropped the atom bomb. Some people say they should have tried to debate and tried to talk them out of continuing the war rather than drop the bomb. But the people who knew that Japan was not about to do that. They weren't going to do that. They were going to defend their island until the atom bomb dropped. And I'm sorry that that killed so many people, but in the long run, it saved lives. And most important, mine. I was in the occupation of Japan for 11 months, and not once did I ever feel I was in harm's way. Not once did I ever feel I was in danger. There for 11 months. And I found the Japanese people to be courteous, accommodating, cooperative. But that was because of Hirohito, not because I was such a nice guy. And thank God he did it, and MacArthur allowed him to be there and be in charge. It just saved us all kinds of problems. And so the occupation of Japan was very successful. Occupation is that you're taking over and you're in charge of any major decisions. But what they did with Japan, they kind of let the businesses that they had been running, the Japanese, they continued to run their business. They did have I don't know whether it was a full power parliament, but they had an organization that controlled how the government and everything was operated. Hirohito was still the spiritual leader, but Japan kind of ran the country very similar to how they ran it before the war started. And we were there to make sure that they didn't fault.
When Cliff was not performing his military duties in Japan, he treated himself by pursuing his interests.
I played baseball on the Marine Corps team. I was fortunate to get to travel all over Japan. I never got to Tokyo, but I got to Kyoto, which is the cultural center of Japan. I got to Osaka, I got to Kobe, and these are Japanese names you probably don't know or have never heard of, but they're major cities. And as I say, wherever I went, the culture was very accommodating and very pleasant to be in. And we would play different teams in the military service. And I enjoyed that very much, as well as my repatriation. I was a corporal, and I made sergeant shortly thereafter. And I had some responsibilities in repatriation, but I got to play baseball. And we were allowed to go on liberty. And you know what liberty means? That means when you have to go off the base and go, you want to go to a movie, you want to go out to have a dinner at a restaurant, you want to go on a date if you can get one. And dating, well, we didn't do too much. There was some dating going on. There were some Japanese and American soldiers and Marines that got married and that type of thing, which would be pretty tough to do based on the cultural difference. I remember one time I was aboard a streetcar and this woman is standing up and I tried to give her my seat and she wouldn't take it. And I said, come on. She said, no. And then guy tells me later on, she says, the women don't sit, the women stand, the men sit. And so I stopped doing that. I didn't agree with it, but who am I to try and change the culture of a country, you know?
Cliff played a significant role in his division, and his unit also greatly contributed to the war effort.
These ribbons you wear with your uniform, and that tells me I was in the South Pacific. And this one here tells me that our unit got the presidential citation for Iwo Jima. So that was kind of a nice thing to have. And we kind of brag about that when we have the opportunity. But you know, I told you they spend so much time teaching you how to use your weapon in boot camp. And they have 3 grades. They have marksman, sharpshooter, and expert. Well, I wasn't an expert. I was a sharpshooter. And a marksman was below it. But you wear it, letting people know that you think you know what you're doing when you got a rifle in your hand. And this is just my discharge. They tell me I didn't get kicked out, that I was discharged officially. And it says on the back here, tells you that you got wounded, participated in action against the enemy at Iwo Jima, February 19th, 1945 to March 14th, 1945. Participated in the occupation of Japan, 22nd, 45 to July 46. You know.
After serving in World War II, Cliff realizes the effects of war and its futility.
It doesn't solve situations in the long run. But you're in between a rock and a hard place. You talk to someone who won't talk to you, or you try and deal with someone who doesn't want to deal and work out the problems, or you have a country that is so far removed from civilization that you'd really want to help it, but it doesn't want to be helped. And then all of a sudden they become belligerent. And if you try to say, well, here's my plan, it's nothing but peace and love and prosperity, and they don't buy it, what do? See? You're almost forced into some type of combative position that you don't want to be in. And this is what's happening in the world. We see it in so many places. We try to talk to Iran. And Iran doesn't want to talk to us. They blame us, we blame them. And there we are, at loggerheads. And the time may come where something happens. And I think it's stupid. It's not going to solve the problem. But how do you solve the problem? So my attitude towards war is negative. My attitude about how to solve it is very mixed. I really don't know. You know, if someone comes and punches you, God says, give the other cheek. You know. How do you give the other cheek? Do you keep giving the other cheek?
We thoroughly enjoyed interviewing Cliff and are glad that we had the opportunity of meeting such an extraordinary man. He faced great danger and was willing to sacrifice his life to preserve our freedom. Although he was wounded, he never gave up hope and served our country with courage. He taught us about the importance of comradeship during World War II. He showed us about the life of a Marine and the dedication and discipline it took to be a soldier. He talked of old friends and the lasting bonds he made while in the service. We are honored to have heard a first-hand account of the historic Battle of Iwo Jima. We will always remember our interview with Clifton Tozer and the stories he regaled us with. He was selfless in his patriotic sacrifice for our country, and we are forever indebted to him and every other American who served in the war.